Hey everybody, what's going on? The Montreal Canadiens are finally just about to head into the month where they'll be picking in the 2024 NHL Draft. And this is a big draft for the Montreal Canadiens and one they once again need to get right, assuming they want to head on a positive trajectory with the rest of their retool or rebuild, whatever you want to call it. Before we get into today's video though, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. It's as easy as clicking in the bottom right hand corner of this video. Now, the Montreal Canadiens are set to pick 5th overall in the 2024 NHL Draft, and they've long been suspected to be picking a forward in the 2024 draft. But there's a lot of interesting thoughts that go into this decision, with Kent Hughes already laying out that if all things are equal, the Montreal Canadiens would prefer a forward with the 5th overall pick in the draft. But I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here and say, what if the best player on the board when the Montreal Canadiens are set to pick 5th overall is a defenseman? I'm not necessarily sure the Montreal Canadiens would rule that out, especially with how we've seen them pick in years past. Let's say Anton Silyev, the giant Russian defenseman, is still on the board when the Montreal Canadiens select. You'd have to think that would at least give them some reason to pause and consider their options because they don't have that type of defenseman in their system. Even if the offensive upside is a bit questionable with this player, this is a dominant player that's shown that in the KHL, and he continues to do that at a high level as a youngster. And I think that it's really valuable and something that the Montreal Canadiens could potentially look to add if he was available with the 5th overall pick. You have also defensemen like Sam Dickinson in that area as well, Carter Yamachuk. There's just a lot of guys that the Montreal Canadiens could consider with that 5th overall selection. Zane Parekh, I think the Montreal Canadiens would likely lean away from those offensive-minded defensemen just because they already have one of those lined up for the future in Lane Hudson. They have a lot invested in him. But I just think that the Montreal Canadiens would be wise to at least consider a defenseman with the 5th overall pick. I know that there was a lot of chatter about last year's selection in David Reinbacher, and the Canadiens brass reportedly saying that they would have him ranked above all the other defensemen in this draft class. I wonder if their opinion has changed a little bit just because this is a defenseman-heavy draft and one that has a lot of dominant defensemen in it. So I think that there's a reason to potentially consider that, even if it's not necessarily what I would do. I think there's value in that. It's one of those situations where you pick the best player available and then down the road you decide how are we going to utilize these assets to really acquire a top forward so that we can get over that hump as a high scoring potential team. I think the Montreal Canadiens are going to be built from the net out. They're going to have a young core in goal with Samuel Montembeault, Jacob Fowler one day, Caden Primo, and those are solid goaltending prospects and current NHLers. And then you have the defenseman pool they have right now, and it's a very solid pool. But I do still think they're potentially lacking that number one game-changing defenseman, and they could potentially select that in this draft if they so choose with the 5th overall pick. I'm not necessarily certain that they would go in that direction, but it's at least something to consider here, depending on who is available. And we're starting to get those whispers with the combine quickly approaching. That's going to be an interesting thing to factor in because you're going to start seeing teams finalize their lists and really get deep into the trenches for how this 2024 draft will play out. That's it for me today from Cook's Corner. As always, let me know in the comment section down below if you'd be opposed with the Montreal Canadiens potentially selecting a defenseman with the 5th overall pick. I'm Zach Cook. We'll see you later.